does this weekend's rescue mission impact the diplomatic effort to bring this conflict to an end? And will this overseas trip hit home for voters when it comes to Biden's foreign policy? Here with us is Bruen. He's a former White House director of global engagement under President Obama and currently the president of the Global Situation Room. Good morning. Thank you so much for joining us.
Great to be with you.
So as we were discussing, Biden wrapped up his visit to Europe today. You're a former diplomat who has been on these types of visits many times before. What did you make of his trip overseas, Brett?
Well, it was symbolic in so many ways, but it was also significant and allowed President Biden to draw contrast with where we currently are in our efforts to support Ukraine against an invasion from an authoritarian leader, just like we supported France in its efforts to liberate itself from an authoritarian invasion. But it didn't stop there, Hena. We also saw Biden make efforts to draw parallels with Trump in his fight in this campaign in what Biden's calling a fight for democracy. So he got a lot of mileage out of this trip, not just the miles on the frequent flyer ones you get on Air Force One.
So we know Biden needed to portray strength on the world stage with his foreign policy. The world was watching. Do you think he accomplished that?
Well, look, there's continuing to be a lot of critique that Biden is an aging octogenarian. And yet, at the same time, standing alongside so many of those centurions, those who fought on the beaches of Normandy, it did evoke, at least for those of us who were watching the entirety of the ceremony, the notion that Biden was there from that greatest generation, continuing the struggle for freedom, democracy. So I think it worked in this instance. But look, the White House has got to show, the campaign has got to show that he still has 4 more years in him. And, it is going to require more interviews, more energetic engagement out there on the campaign trail.
Let's go back to foreign policy. 4 hostages were rescued. We saw jubilant celebrations, understandably so. But what does that mean for negotiations between Israel and Hamas?
Well, look, this gives a big boost to Prime Minister Netanyahu, who was under extraordinary pressure. In fact, there was a press conference planned by his opposition leader, who's part of this war cabinet coalition, and it was held off. Benny Gantz decided not to hold that press conference last night. A lot of speculation that he was going to withdraw from that coalition. So for now, Netanyahu is able to bask in the emotion, the celebration of the liberation of these 4 hostages. But at the same time, pressure, as we've heard from President Biden, as well as President Macron and others, continues to mount on the Israeli prime minister that he has got to advance towards some sort of ceasefire, to some sort of at least temporary resolution of this situation.
We've seen so many Israelis protest in Israel. Do you think this garnered any goodwill towards Netanyahu? Because a lot of his own citizens aren't happy with the way he's handling this.
He's going to say, my strategy is working, that we have to continue these military operations, that it will lead to the liberation. But at the same time, Hena, the fact that yesterday represented the biggest number of hostages being liberated, and that was 4. And there are more than 150, including Americans, that are still held by Hamas. This process is extraordinary, excruciatingly slow. So I think Netanyahu is going to have to come up with something else. At the end of the day, I think you're going to hear from President Biden that we need to move expeditiously and through some sort of international observation mission towards a ceasefire. And that ultimately gives Netanyahu cover to say, I'm not just trusting Hamas, but there will be some enforcement, some observation of this deal.
To that point, yesterday, former Arkansas Governor Mike Huckabee was on the show, and he told me there is no negotiating with terrorists. So what other options does Israel have to get those remaining hostages back? To your point, over 100 still remain.
Yeah, look, this is really tricky. And would the United States have negotiated with al-Qaeda in the wake of September 11th? It is a legitimate question. And yet at the same time, obviously, the civilian toll continues to rise and the outrage does with it. So I think at some point we have to get to a stage where there is an international observation mission, that you allow the efforts of the diplomats to get to some point where Israel can accept it, where Hamas can abide by it.
Thanks for watching. Go to joinnn.com to find NewsNation on your television provider. And don't forget to click the red subscribe button below to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.